I'm Johnnetta Betch Cole. I align myself with what my sister, the beach lady, loved to say, that sometimes and in some places, there is the coming together of what we associate with the economy and black people. And it happens, she said, on American Beach. It was founded by a millionaire who said there must be recreation and relaxation without humiliation, and he meant for all of the black folk who came here. And it was with pride that he said it would be for the employees. That didn't mean just the Lewis family and the officers. It meant the janitor who cleaned the beach. It meant the individuals then called the secretaries who took the notes. This beach began with a call for far more equality among black people on the question of resources. As my sister Carol Alexander likes to say, this trained storyteller, when you want to make a kind of pivot, as time come and time go, the question of economics became intensely central to this beach. And by that I mean developers came to eat it up for their profits. And again, I reference the language of the beach lady. They came to buy God's land. And it took a mighty organizing, yes, led so often by the beach lady. But you know, anything of real importance, I would say, is never done by a single individual. But with women and men, and yes, people of different races, there was an enormous pushback that said, you will not gobble up this land. And as time come and time go, here we are now because of the efforts of folk. Yes, some rich folk, but a whole lot of ordinary folk in terms of material wealth. Here we are now with this beach on the National Registry, a historic site. When we focus on what I call justice, it will inevitably involve issues of the economy, of politics, and until we can finally take care of it, of race and other systems of inequality.
I am Carol J. Alexander. American Beach was built on faith. American Beach was built on vision and a belief. American Beach's leaders of the Afro and its president, A.L. Lewis, they believe that God will lead us to the promised land. Well, the promised land on the earth and in the politics of the United States of America has to have some money attached to it. So if I am in the Sunday school and we're believing we're getting ready to help people, or we're believing we're getting ready to accomplish something, the first thing that the church says is, let's pass the plate. Because we know that what has to help us in this land is money. Religion teaches us to help ourselves, and religion teaches us to help others. Religion teaches us to be able to prosper. And how can, in America, can we separate economy, religion, and politics? And then the other is race. So there's an intersectionality of all of them. There's no conflict. There's no conflict. It's just a matter of understanding which is the strongest. I say religion and faith gives you principle. Everything else follows.
there's sometimes this notion that what's going on in the economy is in some form of tension with what's going on with the people. And I think one could make that case. One could make the case that our nation, my nation, founded on a principle of equality and justice for all, has not really delivered in terms of making sure that all of America's people are economically well taken care of. If we go to the figures of the Children's Defense Fund, they are really frightening. The number of children who go to bed hungry every night in the richest country in the world.
My name is Carlton Jones. So often economics is somewhat driven by greed. Whereas if you understand the Bible, the Old Testament as well as the New, the teachings, the New Testament came along to complement the Old Testament. Most people have put the Old Testament away, but in the Old Testament, they had biblical economics. So the Jewish people actually, when they reached a certain age, they became a man and a woman, even though they may not have married at that point. But they were taught home economics. So if you can't take care of your home, it's hard to take care of a business. And so a lot of those Christian principles that were rooted in the Old Testament goes back to what A.L. Lewis and many of those founders had a religious connection. They were pastors. So the Bible really instructed us to, business, you got to fund a ministry. God did not intend for us to be broke, because you can't help anyone if you can't help yourself. And so the New Testament, where Christ spoke and made it very clear, and most people don't really understand, is he used the farmer as a way to get his messages. He was able to talk about sowing a seed and what kind of ground you put it in. And then he talked about, if you put it in good ground, you're going to reap a harvest. Now the harvest, that whole theory can go down to just one example. One kernel of corn will produce 700 kernels of corn in a stalk. Now that farmer, when he plants a field of corn, he's not just sowing that field for just his family. He's sowing it for the overflow. Most farmers live in the overflow. They sell their produce to market, and then what's left over is for the farmer. You're not providing food or whatever you produce in a business just for your own consumption. Throughout the Bible, they talked about the tithe. Some people call it now the tithe. It's where you give back 10%, and that 10% is used to help humanity. And so we have sort of lost track of humanity. So there's going to be this conflict, and it's going to be the haves and the have-nots. It's always been that way. I mean, from the beginning of Adam and Eve with sin, it's been a struggle between economics and how do you take care of your brother and your sister, who may not be your real brother and sister, but the sense of community. And so I think it's going to be something that you got to practice what you preach. I think society, regardless of where it is in the world, has a responsibility to take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. I'm not talking about people that choose to be homeless, but I'm talking about because of circumstances. You just don't really know how many veterans in Jacksonville that are homeless, that have benefits, that they don't even know how. No one's taken the time to help them navigate government so that they can get health care or housing. But most of the world has been brought into the world with humble beginnings. And I like the stories about people like A.L. Lewis and Eartha White and my grandfather, who went through the Spanish flu, went through World War I, and survived, and lost only one child because of the Spanish flu. There was a sense of survival, but it didn't happen just because it was a sense of community in that town called Radford, Virginia, black and white. Yes, you had some people that hated, there was a racial division, but there was more people that had humanity in that community, much like what I found here on this island.
The executives of the insurance company had first bids on purchasing the property and building homes. But what the insurance company did was to build pavilions alongside of the ocean front that they had. And it wasn't any overnight stay pavilions. It had a restaurant, a bathhouse, and all of the churches, the people of the community. It did not have anything to do with their economics. It had to do with coming to this oasis and have a free time on a weekend with your family. If you had 10 cents that you gave to the church, you were on that bus that came up here and had a whole day experiencing the same amenities as the people who had. So this was a beach of the have and have-nots, and they all came together because, again, that was the vision of A.L. Lewis, for all people to come together.
I think Carol summed it up, and that's been my experience. I have friends of American Beach who, some of the longest living families, that have often said that their church brought them here, and sometimes they only went once a year, but they look forward to it. And it was something that I can tell you right now in Jacksonville, in the African American community, there are kids that have never been to the ocean. It's only 12 miles from Jacksonville. They've never seen the ocean. So a lot of times we take things for granted, but can you imagine back in 1935 that this must have been just the opportunity? You didn't have to have buildings, just the opportunity to see the ocean. The ocean is, anybody that talks about relaxation, you always talk about the water. And the ocean, there's a big difference between the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. That ocean is not very noisy. This one does roar. And so it just sort of lulls you, it's just different.
I think that for many people in our world, there is a strong spiritual connection with water. And if we try to unpack that, some would say life itself begins with fluids. Some would say, out of the specificity of my religion, Christianity, there's a centrality of water, of baptism. But for those who are not religious, but are spiritual, we will often hear references to the calmness and the roar of water. In a sense, the polar presences of calmness and fury. For African Americans, water has deep, 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 deep meanings. And certainly, we are not the only people from Africa. If we go back far enough, whether it is through a biblical interpretation or through evolution, it all began on one continent. It's called Africa. That's the motherland. And when we look at that shape and we see not just the land, but the water around it, we as African Americans remember with great pain that we were literally ripped from that continent and put on a boat in the most inhumane of circumstances onto ships across the Atlantic Ocean. We call it the Middle Passage. I personally know how emotional it can be to think about that. On one of the many trips that I've been privileged to have to the continent, I stood in the door of no return. That's the name of this door on Gorée Island, off of the coast of Senegal in West Africa, where enslaved people were literally pushed through that door in shackles put on ships, I wept. I wept for any and all people who had been pushed through that door. Imagine being in that ship, surrounded by water. You're in the hull of that ship. People in their own excrement, people in their own blood, viewed as less than human. And so that water is so much a part of who we are and how we have been falsely defined. When enslavement was officially ended, enslavers, when they were about to be caught, would simply throw human beings into the ocean, into the water. And the historical records tell us women who so loved their children, throwing them into that ocean to avoid enslavement. So water has an incredible place in our history and her story. Without the ocean, there would have been no travel from Africa to the so-called New World. Without the ocean, somebody by the name of Columbus would not have gotten so confused as to say he discovered the New World. Water is central in who we are as human beings. But I return to my point that for African Americans, for Black people, it has deep, 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 deep meaning. And so when I am on American Beach, I admit that I move between the calmness that the ocean can bring me and the disturbance that I feel as I'm reminded of the role of the ocean in my people's history and her story.
Think about the confusion that our people felt, especially being on that ship, not knowing where they were going, and the waves bringing them up and down. They had a connection to the water, because West Africa is on this same water. And when they wanted to rest from a hard day of work, I might picture my people in Senegal would go to the edge of the ocean as the sun set to relax. And then when they were caught and thrown on those ships and the connection to that water, they didn't know where they were going, couldn't even figure it out. And yes, when the babies were sick or people in fear and they jumped for freedom, then when they got here, the atrocities that happened. But when they went to the water, not only were they confused that they were in a different land, think about it. They didn't face the ocean at the end of the day watching the sun set. They were facing the ocean that in the morning sun rose. I would come up here with the kids sometime to get Mama Mav in the morning and baby get here. It's such a beautiful sunrise. Oh, baby, look at that coming out of the ocean. Oh, Yemen, Yas, you're gonna have a wonderful day. Sometimes at night, we would be here and we would hear the roar. She would tell us stories about the people who were there. Like Johnnetta was saying, that the women would throw their babies just to freedom. I call it freedom because they were free. They didn't have to come to here. But Marvine seemed to hear the people in the ocean. She seemed to try to get us to hear that roar of the ancestor. I can't describe it as saying that it was some anguish sound. No, it's just the spirit saying, remember. So think about what our people were confused. They knew that their life was engaged in that water. engage with the sunrise and the sunset. And as Johnnetta was speaking of that, it made a tear of confusion. Was it the spirit of our ancestor that made me come up with the sunrise and the sunset? Yeah, it's a spirit here that is still alive. It's a spirit on American Beach that is still engaging. It's a spirit of American Beach that is still welcoming, and I think it's welcoming to remembrance.